The Deep End team acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and live, pays respect to elders past, present and future, and recognises the importance of Indigenous knowledge to informing public debate. On today's episode of The Deep End, we speak with Rachel Perkins. Rachel Perkins is an Australian film and television director, producer and screenwriter. She directed the films Radiance, One Night to the Moon, Bran Nue Dae and Jasper Jones. She is an Arrernte and Kalkatungu woman from Central Australia who was raised in Canberra by the Aboriginal leader Charles Perkins and his wife Eileen. She founded Blackfella Films in 1992, which has produced acclaimed television programs including First Australians, Mabo and Redfern Now. She has served as a commissioner of the Australian Film Commission and on the board of Screen Australia. She was curator for the 2009 Message Sticks Indigenous Film Festival and was president of the AIATSIS Foundation for the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. Her Boyer Lecture of 2019 was called The End of Silence. She is presently co-chair of the Yes 23 campaign of Australians for Indigenous Constitutional Recognition in the imminent Voice Referendum.
So, hello Rachel.
Hello Marcia and Aaron, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good under the circumstances, thanks.
Welcome to the Deep End podcast, hosted by Aaron Corn and myself. We're absolutely delighted to have you. We're on Bunurong Wurundjeri country at the Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne. At South Bank, our producer Patrick is working away in the studio to ensure quality. So the topic of the moment is, of course, the referendum vote on October 14, and you've been such a central figure, Rachel, and you were at the Uluru National Indigenous Constitutional Convention, and you're the daughter, of course, of Charles Perkins, and I watched your Charles Perkins oration, Dr. Charles Perkins oration, absolutely brilliant. So why don't we start there with your history in the movement from what looks like your time as a toddler in Canberra.
Yes, well, I've grown up in the movement, as you describe, which has been a great privilege. And, you know, I met you when I was a young girl, Marcia, I think, in Canberra in the 70s probably. So, yeah, it's very familiar space, but I've never really been a campaigner or a leader as such. But this time on this issue, I've sort of stepped into it. Mostly I've been a documenter as in my role as a filmmaker of the movement, but I decided this time I could step into the space a bit more. So I've been volunteering for the last couple of years on this, and now, working full-time on the campaign, which has been amazing and wonderful.
Good to hear that you're having a great experience. Some of us aren't.
Well, yeah, I think it's nothing new, is it, to be, as you have been, vilified. It's something that comes with the territory of being a Indigenous leader in this country, I think. So I suppose it's been less surprising for me than it has for other people, I think, who are, surprised by the attacks and the vitriol, because I suppose growing up as Dad's daughter, we saw that a lot. Yeah. And it's not acceptable by any means, but it's not new for them to target Indigenous leadership, unfortunately.
Must be a Friday.
Your father played a critical role in the lead up to the 1967 referendum, when more than 90% of Australians voted yes. I saw a beautiful photograph in the Queensland University archives when he visited there in the 60s with the old campaigners, a wonderful group of leaders, including some leaders from Queensland. It was lovely to see that photograph.
Udjuru Nunakul,
yes.
John McGuinness, and
yeah. So tell us a bit about, your father's work in that campaign, because I think most people don't know about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know about it, obviously, because you were the secretary of FCATSI, but a lot of others don't know. It was, I mean, I wasn't born at the time, but from what I've read and from what I've heard, it was a very collective approach that seemed to forge lifelong relations, friendships between a group of leaders and their supporters who came together for the cause of allowing the Commonwealth to make laws about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people under the race provision 5126 and to count us in the census. So that was one of the aims of FCATSI, and it was a 10-year campaign and our most successful referendum, as you pointed out. I think that seeing those photos that you talk about, it's wonderful seeing, you know, Sir Doug Nicholls and Pearl Gibbs and Joe McGuinness and, you know, Chicka Dixon and yourself, Marcia, and all those people who forged that path for us in this country. And I think in some ways this is the unfinished business of that movement, in that in 1967, you know, the Commonwealth were given the right to make laws about us, and now we're trying to be heard when those laws and policies are made. So it feels very much that we're on the same trajectory of trying to, you know, work out how Indigenous people can deal with the state or the Crown. And we have been trying to work that out for more than 200 years. And now we're seeking, you know, a guarantee that we will always have a way to present, at least to the state, about issues and policies that they make that affect us. So yes, it has a history that goes back to FCATSI, but of course it has a history that goes back to 1788, 1770, when the East Coast was first occupied. So yeah, it's a long haul of history, isn't it? It's a long arc of history that we're in the process of, and I'm not sure whether all Australians understand the context of that.
No.
But certainly that's in my mind when I think about constitutional recognition.
Well, quite slight historical note for listeners who don't understand it. So just, I mean, anybody feel free to pick this up, but FCATSI, a lot of people won't now be familiar with that acronym anymore.
So the Federal Council for the Advancement of Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders, an organisation that started with the Aboriginal Advancement Leagues post-World War II, and tried very hard for many years to remove the discriminatory legislation across the country, campaigned for the right to vote and other citizenship rights, and was critical to the 10-year campaign that Rachel mentioned leading up to the 1967 referendum.
So did FCATSI wind up or morph into something else, or what happened?
It wound up in 1977, sadly. But by that time, of course, Rachel's father had taken up a post in the Commonwealth government following the change to the Constitution, which permitted the Commonwealth to make laws for Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders.
Yeah.
And so he headed up the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, the very first Commonwealth department.
Oh, wow.
So, Rachel, you have been campaigning, and you're actually a director of the organisation, the Foundation Australians for Indigenous Constitutional Recognition, one of the critical campaign bodies for the yes vote in this referendum in 2023. Tell us about the work that you've undertaken since Uluru and how you think we're faring now.
So look, we've been the board has been fundraising for the campaign, and we only got our charitable status in January, because this is an interesting story for you. So Gary Johns, who's the chairperson of the No campaign,
Oh, yes.
he was the chair of the Charities Commission, and so we were trying to get our charitable status up, you know, earlier, but of course he wouldn't approve it because he didn't agree with the referendum question and what we were trying to achieve. So we couldn't get it while he was still there. Once he resigned, then in January, we were able to get our charitable status. So we set our board up in January, and we've been going hell for leather ever since. And we have the biggest network of volunteers ever brought together in Australian history. Got 45,000 at the moment. Normally in a political campaign, you might have 10,000 if you're lucky. And so it's a huge groundswell of support from Australian people, and we've been rolling out a campaign across the country, and not a lot of it is visible, but every day our people are door knocking and phone banking and handing out flyers and just having conversations with everyday Australians. So that's been part of our what we call the ground campaign, which includes events, and then we have the air campaign, which is sort of advertising and media. So we've just been doing a lot of that work. And how we're faring, well, it's going to be very tough. I think that it would be no surprise to anyone for me to point out that the Murdoch press, its commentators are largely in the vast majority very opposed to this provision. And so we've had a very difficult task having our voices heard, in fact.
Yeah.
With the sort of concentrated media ownership that we have in this country. So it's challenging. There's a lot of misinformation, of course, that's been spreading. The sort of anti-vax movement is very involved in the No campaign.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about what this actually is. And I'm sure that you would have had other people talk about what it is. It's an advisory committee to the Parliament and government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, elected by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, but that has been undermined. The clarity of that's been undermined by the misinformation campaign. So, look, it's going to be tough. There's no doubt about it. We are the underdog in this campaign, and we will see what the Australian voters decide. And it's only days away now. So, but if the polls say we're going to lose, we think we can still win because the groundswell of public support is growing, and we've seen recently the polls improve in favour of the Yes campaign. But look, it's hard to call at this stage. It's going to be tough, I think, which means that Australians generally need to, if you do support this, it's not enough just to say, oh, I'm voting yes. You need to get active and talk to your friends and family and get informed and try and influence this outcome, because I believe that this certainly won't come again in my lifetime. And it's just the opportunity is just before us. So it would be a great tragedy if we weren't able to get there.
I often think of the No campaign as the Gary Johns All-Stars. And if anybody has any doubt as to the ideological underpinnings of the No campaign, I recommend you Google Gary Johns, look at his bibliography of many books that he's authored, and you'll find exactly the ideology that has fed into the No campaign.
Yes, it's unfortunate that people like Gary, can say things like Aboriginal people should be blood tested. Those who get jobs in government or social security payments, that they have to get blood tested. I mean, that's just an obscene thing to say in this day and age, and to still have his position as chairman of the No campaign just speaks volumes about.
I don't think people who see highly visible Indigenous No campaign proponents in the media understand the ideological influence that Johns has over that entire campaign, and how so much of the scripted material that they're working with comes straight out of his playbook. I don't think people have any concept of that. And, there are certainly Indigenous spokespeople, prominent Indigenous spokespeople in that mix in the 24-hour news cycle, and I think that rhetoric is very cleverly weaponized against the Yes campaign in this whole debate in a very deleterious way.
Let's go back to May 2017. You were at Uluru preparing for the convention. You've been involved ever since, but tell us about your experience at Uluru during the National Indigenous Constitutional Convention, which voted unanimously on the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Well, it was a wonderful time because, more than 250 delegates had been elected from their communities, of which I was one. I'd been elected from the Central Australian meeting. We were all there at Uluru together, and it felt like a great celebration of Indigenous unity. Of course, it was, there was a feeling of tension because we weren't sure what the outcome would be and whether people would unify together. So, but there was a lot of singing, playing guitars, which always happens at Indigenous dues, and there was a lot of excitement at the possibility that we would finally get a agreement from a good representative sample of Indigenous Australia about what constitutional recognition, what form it would take, because obviously there was many reports that preceded this that, you were involved with, Marcia, and a number of committees that looked at this question, and really this was the moment where Indigenous Australians would get some sort of consensus on the question. So it felt very momentous, I think. And so when we got a almost overwhelming majority with a few dissenters, I think 7 or 9 out of the 250 delegates, it felt like a wonderful moment of unity. Standing ovation, people were weeping, and it felt like a great moment. Of course, those people who walked out, had their own press conference, and I was very upset that we hadn't been able to get entire consensus. But as someone pointed out to me, the people who walked out, some of whom I respect and have regard for and have known for a very long time, but someone pointed out to me that they've been walking out of things all their lives and not to worry about it. So that was an interesting angle on it that did put it in perspective for me. So yeah, it was an incredible moment. And yeah, at the time that was happening, Noel had spoken to me about a physical representation of the statement and asked me to put something together. And so I'd been running around with Maraku artists, getting canvas and getting the signatures and buying texters and getting canvas worked out and getting that prepared to be created as well. So that felt like another thing where I've been able to just contribute outside of the political leadership, just whether it be through filmmaking or, organising the canvas or doing other bits and pieces to support. So that's a very memory that I'll cherish, that involvement.
So you're actually the curator, producer of the gorgeous Uluru Statement from the Heart on canvas.
Well, I don't know whether I'm the curator, but I'm just the person who helped put it together. I called my sister, actually. I'm like, now we need the words. How are we going to do this? We got a designer. We mocked up a few alternatives, and because of course there's so many words, and we knew that we wouldn't, with the texter, we wouldn't be able to write them very clearly on the canvas. So we decided we'd get them printed subsequently, get everyone to sign it first, then which we had the text already of the Uluru Statement, of course, but that we'd send that down to get printed, but get the signatures first, then the painting done, and then finally we'd take it to a printers and get the text printed in the middle. And in fact, that's sort of created all sorts of conspiracy theories that people didn't know what they were signing at the time and all this sort of stuff. But actually, it was just because we couldn't print the text as fine as, we had to print it because we couldn't write it as finely as we need and clearly as we needed to. So that's the very mundane explanation around that. But yes, it's a treasure now, that canvas, and I'm very proud about Rini Kulicha and who painted it, who led the painting, and also Clive Scollay, who is now deceased, but got the canvas from Maraku artists, brought it to Yalara, and how it came together was a very good story.
And you made that amazing documentary film to coincide with the signing as well, which I think starts with a entire sort of history of the Aboriginal rights Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights movement in Australia, and then culminates with, as I recall, a series of overwhelmingly numerous photos of people signing the document. That's a powerful piece of work, Rachel. It's an amazing piece. I think everybody should see it, and if we can, I think we should link it to this podcast, actually.
Well, I'm cautious of you overhyping it, Aaron, because it's basically just images with voiceover, but it comes from a film that Megan and I put together, which was Megan Davis shown at the regional dialogues leading up to it, because she wanted to show how constitutional recognition fits within the historical context of Indigenous advocacy in engaging with government, in different attempts to engage with government over time, starting with in the 1830s in Tasmania and leading up to where we are now. So that was important for delegates to understand that this was not a recent thing, because I think constitutional recognition, it hasn't had the sort of discussion that, say, treaty has in the Aboriginal community over more than 50 years. So some people were like, what is this thing? What's constitutional recognition? And they needed a framework to understand how the request for a voice has taken different forms over many years. And so, we looked at advocacy from people like William Cooper, the Aboriginal community of Tasmania who were in exile, William Barak, and many others who had tried to be heard. The film sort of shows constitutional recognition coming out of that period, that historical context.
To respectfully disagree, I think you're underhyping it, because we showed it here at the University of Melbourne on the first evening of the university's leadership conference, which had 200 plus people all sitting in a dining room. They were shown that film right up front, and then Marcia was invited to speak to what was in it and then answer other questions for about half an hour while everybody sat there with their breadsticks. And people were absolutely overwhelmed by, I guess, the torrent of activity that goes back into time beyond most people's living memory now. And, some people have a vague understanding of that longitudinal context, but most people don't. And a lot of people have a lot of gaps in their understanding. And the commentary amongst that group of people after seeing that film was really quite energized and electric. People were actually really, most people in the room were on board to begin with, but people were really sold on the idea that this is an important historical moment for us. I think it's a beautiful montage, absolutely beautiful montage, and I think the more people who see that, the better.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been campaigning like a trooper. So can we hear the highlights first? Tell me about your best experiences out on the campaign trail, trying to get a yes vote over the line.
Well, there's been so many, from just average Australians who've come out, on a Saturday morning, standing there with leaflets because they believe in it, who've never campaigned before, and just having a conversation with those sort of people has been a highlight. It just rejuvenates your spirit, hearing how much they care about it, and just meeting them. They're such decent, lovely people. So those are the small things, I suppose. On a larger scale, seeing, 50,000 people just keep coming and coming up the Cleveland Street in Sydney, just incredible. Just the waves of people coming out on a weekend to show their support, and that happening across the country. Someone handed me a megaphone. I was like, I had never used a megaphone before. I was like, oh, what do I say? The megaphone.
That's great.
And suddenly I was like, Oh, okay. Actually, yes. I'm going to say thank you for being here. Remember this moment. Be proud of yourselves. This is what unity looks like in Australia. So, yeah, I've become quite like a megaphone now.
That's beautiful.
And look, there's been some beautiful ways that, particularly with musicians, the way musicians have come out. So, singing songs with Paul Kelly is obviously a life highlight. He's such a gentleman and a friend to Aboriginal Australia. So there's been all those sorts of highlights. But I think most importantly for me, how proud I am to stand alongside all these great Indigenous leaders and do what I can to support their work. That's what's most important to me. That's the main highlight, that people like yourself, Marcia, who've put in almost their entire lives into this movement. So to be able to walk alongside you and others and, support your work and all that you've given, that's the most important thing to me, I think, out of everything.
Thanks, Rachel. You were talking about the Vote Yes march in Sydney. I understand that there were more than 50,000 people who turned up at that march in Sydney. Is that right?
Yeah, well, look, it's. I don't think anyone sort of worked out how many people there are, because there was just there were so many. Like, the street was full, and it was full for an hour of people, just as far as literally the eye could see. And so I don't know how many there were. I mean, the police say there were 12,000. That's definitely way lower than what it was.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but it was huge. And we organised that within 2 weeks. It could have been much larger. We were trying to get the Harbour Bridge, but we ran out of time. But it was magnificent. And those moments, whatever the outcome, that's something that we will have to remember, that people do care, and they care deeply, and they care in great numbers. So whatever the outcome, we have to, cherish that. And it's going to be difficult, I think, for all of us if this goes down. So we'll have to cling to those moments to remind ourselves of, the potential that's there in this country.
And if the referendum proposal does fail and the voters don't support it in the majority, we will have to remember the thousands of Australians who tried to help us.
Yes, that's right. That will be the thing that gets us through what will be I can't think how to describe it apart from an extended period of mourning.
Well, yeah. A few guests on the program in previous episodes have pointed out, however, that people who vote no will probably forget about this and, go back to their lives. People who vote yes won't be going anywhere because they're generally the people who are already doing whatever they can to help in small ways as often as they can, regardless, and they're going to keep on doing that. Those people won't be abandoning the very clear and apparent issues that need to be dealt with, because those issues will still need to be dealt with no matter what.
I think there will be people who will withdraw. I think there will.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do, because some people have put so much into this, and they'll be gutted and they'll lose their faith in the Australian people. So the stakes are large. They are significant. It's not going to be business as usual.
Yeah.
But the reasons for this won't go away.
No, the reasons for this will not go away, and that's right. There will still be the work to do, but it will be very difficult to do it in a collaborative manner. I mean, the No case is suggesting that, on October the 15th, we'll all have to work together. And I think that's going to be very difficult for people to...
Oh, I agree.
...to do.
Yeah, I agree. It will be terrible.
But anyway, we can still win. And, it might need a bit of a miracle to turn it around. But, polling's been incorrect in the past. So we have to just keep going. We've got 8 days to go as we speak, and just do everything we can.
So, Rachel, you live in Alice Springs from time to time. You have a house there. Your father was born there at the bungalow. The old people's home is named after your grandmother. And I've heard you recently talking about the reasons for this proposal for a voice to Parliament and the executive government. And it is essentially about the lack of progress in achieving parity across a range of social and economic conditions for Aboriginal people. And it's always highlighted in the media how desperate the situation is in Alice Springs from time to time and in the communities around Alice Springs. And yet the No campaign exploits the misery and suffering of people that you know well. So tell me, frankly, please, how you would describe the situation in Alice Springs, what needs to be done, and how do we stop the exploitation of our people's suffering by politicians who care only for their political futures?
Well, I possibly can't be frank on this podcast about how I feel because it would be used against me and used against the campaign. So what I can say, though, is that there's a proportion of our people in Alice Springs, of course, that live, good, healthy lives and are, employed and happy with their lives. But the vast proportion live in acute overcrowding if they have houses at all. There is massive unemployment, very bad health situation, and in a lot of cases, regular domestic and family violence and intergenerational poverty. I mean, my family, we have no land rights. We have this tiny little excision which our family fights over, which doesn't accommodate us all. Our land is taken up in vast pastoral stations. Our uncles and grandfathers worked on cattle stations for very little wages, if anything. So we've had intergenerational unemployment. There's low levels of literacy. Our great sustaining thing, I suppose, is our culture and our language and our country, and that sustains us. But it's very difficult social circumstances. But all of this, of course, is reflected in, a lot of statistical reports. The thing that really annoys me, I think, is that there are a lot of people who have really good solutions to this, and there's a lot of reports that have been written, particularly in relation to child welfare, that are just ignored by politicians. So they suggest things like royal commissions, which aren't the appropriate mechanism for the situation in Central Australia with Indigenous children. But they just ignore all of the expertise that people diligently bring together in reports with recommendations. They just ignore that, come up with their own stuff. And, it just seems that it's used as a media opportunity and actually the people that they talk about, they don't talk to the women in their community. They don't talk to the traditional owners. They don't talk to the representative bodies. They don't talk to people running the health services. They just ignore all of that and put their own views forward, which is exactly why we need a voice.
Yeah.
What we're seeing play out in Australian politics at the moment is the principal reason for we need a voice, because we have ill-informed politicians developing policy positions on the run, and they do not represent the vast majority of Indigenous people. And that's why we need a voice, because we need an authentic, representative, informed voice. I mean, the variety of solutions that the No case are putting forward to our problems, which range from, a national advisory committee of native title holders to blanket audits, just it's incoherent. And we've had enough of incoherent policies from various, politicians over the many decades, and it's got to stop. The voice is about having consistent policy agenda that our people can pursue, that is relevant to their regions, informed by their needs, and based on best practice in Australia and international, based on evidence. That's what the voice can bring. And that's what we desperately need, not the sort of policy flip-flopping that we see that's, defined by the political cycle. But all of this you guys know. So I feel like I'm talking to people who not only know this, but have actually written all of these, this policy over many years.
Well, we're talking to our listeners, and I think to labour the point, the way that Alice Springs has repeatedly and very recently been used as a press junket for releasing, as you say, policy made up in the moment is utterly disgraceful, when report after report after report that is driven by community-informed experience is just completely and utterly ignored. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that front.
It must be tremendously painful to see your hometown being exploited in the way that it is by politicians who don't care about the outcome, and your community being plastered all over the media as the sort of stereotypical Aboriginal disaster, when you yourself are highly successful, and as you say, there are many highly successful Aboriginal people living in Alice Springs, and yet they don't understand. If you don't mind me saying this, that I lived in Alice Springs for many years, as you know, and my daughter was born there. Even if you are educated and you have a house, you have a job, there's no way of escaping the extreme poverty all around, and it's necessary to be available to people. So there's the just sort of basic daily human compassion applies in these situations. There are people who don't have enough to eat or firewood in winter.
Yes, there is huge need. Mm.
What can we do, Rachel, to stop the media from turning our homes and our communities into racist entertainment stereotypes?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, I was in Alice when the leader of the opposition and Senator Jacinta Price recently did their press conference on Anzac Hill, and, we felt powerless to intervene. They hadn't talked to the traditional owners, the native title body. They hadn't talked to the Central Land Council. They hadn't talked to the Tungunjira, women's safety group. They hadn't gone to, the women's shelters. They hadn't talked to the Snake, the childcare, the peak organisation for Aboriginal childcare. They just ignored all of these people work in the field. And they just wandered around the local mall and talked to non-Indigenous people, and a baker, and they just stood on Anzac Hill and said all this stuff, and we have no control over that. And it went out on, the Sky Network and into the Australian newspaper, and meanwhile, the actual elected representatives of our communities, Central Land Council, they don't get heard. So, they might get, a press release that says that, clearly that Jacinta doesn't speak for them or their people or their community, and she should stop pretending she does. But, that gets such a small showing in the press. Like recently I was trying to get a reporter from the Australian to go out to the Central Land Council meeting that they had just last week. And I couldn't get a journalist to go out and sit with people at the Central Land Council and talk to them.
Wow.
So, and this is compared to, say, someone actually compiled all of the times that Jacinta had appeared on Sky since she became shadow spokesman for Indigenous Affairs. And I think out of 143 days, she'd appeared 53 times.
Wow.
It's like one in 3 days. So, that's our challenge. That is our challenge. And that is why we need a voice. What's happening now is why we need a voice, an authentic grassroots voice elected by Indigenous people, not from someone who purports to speak for us. but actually does not. We need an authentic voice.
I think you summed it up, Marcia, in one of your articles, if I recall correctly. The title was something like, Trapped in the Aboriginal Reality TV Show. That, it's like the Alice Springs Hunger Games or something. Everybody's sort of trapped there, media rolls in, takes what they want, and then just leaves everybody to the poverty that they found them in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tragic.
So, Rachel, if you were to speak to somebody today who was undecided about how to vote on October 14, yes or no, to the proposal for constitutional recognition of us as First Peoples by creating a voice to Parliament and the executive government, what would you say to them in our present circumstances?
I would say that they need to be clear and understand that the vast majority of Indigenous people support this. Not only does the polling tell us that consistently over years, but if you look at every major representative body, democratically elected bodies like the land councils on mainland Australia, the vast majority of those representative bodies also support it. So we have grassroots democratic elected Indigenous people plus polling that shows us that overwhelmingly Indigenous people want this. And why do we want this? We want it because we need to be able to talk to government about the laws and policies that they make about us, because we get better solutions when people are listened to. And we have the life experience plus the expertise that we bring to the table to improve the programs and policies that government rolls out on our behalf. And we are sick of being buffeted by the political changes in this country between, changes of government, and we need consistency. We need a plan that is a long-term plan to bring our people out of the poverty that we, more than 30% of our people live with. And that needs a consistent plan based on evidence and best practice. And Indigenous people can bring that expertise to the table. And it's also just the very obvious point that it is time, well overdue, that Indigenous people and our history of existence on this continent is recognised as a foundational part of our national identity, and that recognition should be placed in our highest legal document in the land, and that is the Australian Constitution. And by doing that, it will be a moment of unity for the country where all Australians can embrace this history as part of what it means to be Australian. And we've been needing that recognition for more than 200 years. So it's timely, it's overdue, and it may not happen again in our lifetime. So we must grasp the moment that is before us.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you both. And I hope that the next few days we can turn this nation around. If not, at least we know that we have done everything we can, and particularly you, Marcia, in making this possible.
And thanks to you for all your hard work, Rachel. I've been watching you. You're a trooper.